James Dean is coming back to the big screen, Superman is as strong as glass, and Tiff just got a whole bunch of money from Netflix. All of that and more on your weekly news wrap-up. My name is TJ, I'm a little bit sick, so we're just gonna get right into the film news, starting off with James Dean, someone who's been dead for about 64 years, being cast in a film. Is it ridiculous? Yes, but let's talk about some of the details. According to Variety, Magic City Films has, and I quote, obtained the right from his family to cast Dean posthumously in the secondary lead role in the movie. That movie being Finding Jack, a Vietnam War film. The character that James Dean will be playing will be created completely out of CGI, while another actor will be used to voice the James Dean stand-in CGI person. And this casting choice raises a whole bunch of questions. The first of which is it really that hard to cast a 25-year-old white male in Hollywood? Just get Scarlett Johansson to do it. Boom, roasted. But there are actual serious questions that arise here when it comes to casting the dead. In this case, it's kind of okay because the estate of James Dean said it was fine and they gave their permission to do it. But in the future, am I going to have to worry about my likeness being used without my authorization? Does public domain apply to my face 90 years after I die? Also, who is going to be credited in this role? They've said that they are casting James Dean and just getting someone to do the voice performance. So is James Dean going to be credited as James Dean? Has he even been paying his SAG fees over the last 60 years? Probably not. The dude's been dead all that time. Overall, this is probably just a publicity stunt being put on by the producers of the film, trying to draw attention to a film that might not otherwise get that attention. But please, let me know how you feel about James Dean being cast in this film. And does it make you want to see it even more? Does it pique your curiosity? Let me know in the comments below. Moving on, Nigerian film Lionheart, which was one of the 92 films submitted to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences for the Best International Film Oscar Award, has been disqualified for not being international enough, or at least for containing too much English in it. It's been reported that most of the film's dialogue is actually in English, and only about 12 minutes of it are in the Nigerian language of Igbo, which is one of, from what I've heard, 500 languages that are spoken in the country. There has been some opposition to this move, with Ava DuVernay being the most outspoken, saying, and I quote, "Are you barring this country from ever competing for an Oscar in its official language?" And this is true. English is the official language of Nigeria, and as I mentioned, they have about 500 different languages that are spoken throughout the country, and English is seen as the bridge language that allows everyone in Nigeria to communicate with each other. Personally, I think this was the right decision under the rules as they exist right now. As a Canadian, I know that only films that were shot in French or a First Nations language can make it onto the Best International Film ballot. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge the legacy of colonialism, and saying to countries like Nigeria that they can't submit films that speak to their own cultural heritage and experience because it exists in English is wrong. And so I think that the rules need to be rewritten to allow films that are performed in English but come from a far different cultural standpoint than American culture should be allowed to compete for the award. But I'd love to know what you think. Should Lionheart have been excluded from the Oscars? Please let us know in the comments. They're down there. Moving on, and file this one under cool tech news. Microsoft and Warner Brothers have collaborated on creating a new storage medium made completely out of glass. And in order to demonstrate that storage medium, they just put all of the original 1978 Superman on it. So now Superman is on glass, just as he was always meant to be. The purpose of the project, codenamed Project Silica, is to find a more stable medium for media storage. As it stands right now, films on film can last for a couple of hundred years if they are stored in the proper conditions. And other media, such as videotapes or audio, well, they have different rates of degradation depending on the materials. However, glass degrades at a much slower rate, so it would offer a much better solution for long-term storage of digital media. Now, Warner Brothers is an absolute giant when it comes to archiving film and related media. They have films going back 100 years, TV shows going back 80 years. They've got a ton of stuff in their vault. And so it makes sense for them to try to think of a way to preserve what they already have over the long term. And just to be clear, they've already decided that 200 to 300 years into the future is not long term enough. And so this new solution, Project Silica, is meant to extend the life of these media assets far beyond that. They are in it for the long game, people. I find topics like this super interesting because I come from a film archival background, and so whenever new storage mediums like this are invented, I'm always just like, oh, that's so cool. We don't have to rely on LTO tapes anymore. Google it if you don't know what it is. But I'd love to know what you think about this as well. Should the history of film be transferred to tiny glass coasters, or should film stay on celluloid? Let me know in the comments below. Moving on, are we going to get a Lovecraft trilogy from the makers of Mandy? That certainly does seem to be a possibility. The trailer for Color Out of Space just dropped, and hot off its release, we've gotten word that founders of SpectraVision, Elijah Wood and David Noah, for those who don't know, are thinking about using the Richard Stanley film as a jumping off point for a Lovecraftian trilogy. Wood and Noah stated that if there is an appetite for this type of film, then they would be happy to move on with production of a second and third film taken from an H.P. Lovecraft story. They've also stated that they are already in early development of the Dunwich Horror, which would be the second of this trilogy. And that movie's all about aliens and witches, so sign me up, I'm already 100% there for that film. And honestly, I think the timing of this is a little convenient. It kind of seems like the two producers of Color Out of Space really want people to go out and see the film, and they're trying to add this extra little bit of incentive to go see it. It's almost like they're saying, hey kid, you want more neon lights in your movies? You better go see Color Out of Space then. And it's also worth noting that Color Out of Space did not get the best reviews coming out of TIFF, so this could once again just be a way for the producers to try to get butts in seats. Are you planning on seeing Color Out of Space despite the reviews? And does the possibility of a Lovecraftian trilogy make you want to see Color Out of Space more, just so we can get those second and third films? Let me know in the comments. Moving on, TIFF has signed a 3-year deal with Netflix that will help support its year-round industry programming. This support will include, and I quote, financial support for emerging local directors and the festival's annual September Forum. According to The Hollywood Reporter, this money is coming out of the $25 million fund that Netflix set up in order to support local artists in Canada. We actually reported on a similar story before, where Netflix was giving money to Imaginative, the Indigenous Screen Office, and Wapakoni Mobile out of the same fund. So it seems like Netflix is well on their way of achieving their goal of supporting local talent while also avoiding a confrontation with the CRTC. It's also worth noting that we have no idea how much of that $25 million is going towards TIFF. But considering the profile of TIFF and how much industry type stuff tends to cost, I imagine it's a decent chunk of change. I also have to wonder what TIFF's other sponsors have to think about this. Previously, we reported that Cineplex was none too happy with TIFF and the amount of Netflix and Amazon films that they were allowing into the festival. So much so that Cineplex did not allow Amazon or Netflix films to show at Scotiabank Theatre in downtown Toronto, which is one of the main venues of TIFF and the largest venue. It's also worth mentioning that the TIFF Bell Lightbox was made with funding from Bell Media, which has their own streaming service in Canada called Crave. I wonder how they feel about the relationship between TIFF and Netflix getting a bit rosier. Let's keep the speculation train running and start asking ourselves, is this maybe just the first step for Netflix to take over primary sponsorship of TIFF? It would be a big move for the streaming giant, and it would help legitimize it in the North American film market. Not to mention the worldwide film market, where they are still seen as a usurper and disruptor. But please let me know what you think in the comments below. Are Netflix's intentions here a tad nefarious? Or is TIFF just a nonprofit that needs money and is taking it from whoever can offer it? Please let us know in the comments below. And with that, Cinephiles, we are at the end of the weekly news wrap-up. I'm not going to talk about what's coming out this week because I forgot to do that part because, like I said, I'm a little bit sick. But also, Dr. Sleep is coming out this weekend, so Dr. Sleep is the only movie probably worth talking about in that list anyways. Tell us what you're going to be seeing in the comments below, and of course, have yourselves a great weekend.